The Dallas Stars are off to the Stanley Cup final thanks to their bonus baby, and the New York Islanders look to stay alive tonight. It's Tuesday, and this is the HockeyDebate.com podcast powered by SportsBettingDime.com. Welcome, everyone, to this HockeyDebates.com podcast powered by SportsBettingDime.com, your leading source for odds, sports news, and game predictions. If you're looking to see who's the favorite to win the Stanley Cup, the Hart Trophy, or who's going to win a specific series, check out all the info at SportsBettingDime.com. We'll be talking about some of their Stanley Cup odds today, and we'll also leave a link in the description at the end of this episode so you can check them out yourselves. Kevin, why don't you introduce today's guest?
Yes, everyone. Our special guest is Joe Haggerty of NBC Sports Boston, and obviously we brought him in to talk about the Boston Bruins. And so let's get into it, quickly here, Joe. I'm looking at the ages of the Bruins this year, and obviously they didn't go as far as they had hoped they had gone, especially based on the fact that they were such a consistent team during the regular season in terms of putting up points. But I'm looking, Zdeno Chara, 43, Bergeron, 35, Marchand, 32, Krejci, 34. Should we expect this team to keep contending, or do they got to start to alter it a little bit up front?
I think they do need to make changes, and not cosmetic ones, not small adjustments. Think they need to make some significant roster changes moving forward next season and beyond. And Cam Neely even said as much at the end of season press conference that they really are going to take a hard look at their roster and gauge if the window is up, if the window is closing. Who do they continue to build around? The problem is, like, the Bruins are a good team during the regular season. They won the President's Trophy. They had 100 points. They went to the Stanley Cup final last year and got to Game 7. But the problem is they're in a division with one of the other best teams in the NHL, in the Tampa Bay Lightning, a team that they've lost in 5 games to twice in the last 3 postseasons. The only reason, in my opinion, they got to the Stanley Cup final last year was because the Tampa Bay Lightning lost in the first round. We're talking about a team that's got a core group like the Bruins, except all those guys are in their 20s. The oldest guy is Steve Stamkos at 30 years old. And I do think you see that age gap and that age problem, and some of those older legs start to catch up with them when they're playing a team that's got Victor Hedman in his 20s, that's got Nikita Kucherov, that's got Braden Point that's 24. They have a hard time keeping up with them. And I think you still build around Patrice Bergeron and certainly David Pastrnak and Brad Marchand. But Torrey Krug is an unrestricted free agent. I think that is a guy that they probably aren't going to be able to get back based on the amount of money he's going to get. David Krejci at 34 is entering the last year of his contract. He's the highest paid player on the team. He has 2 points in 10 playoff games against the Lightning the last 2 times that they've met up against them. He's rendered completely ineffective 5-on-5. Those are even strength points. Completely ineffective 5-on-5 against them. And another one that I think may end up moving on, certainly I think they're going to look and see what kind of interest he has. Jake DeBrusk is going to be a restricted free agent. He's averaged 20 goals a season. Obviously, he's going to be due for a big payday, I think somewhere in the $4 to $5 million range. That's the kind of player that the Bruins could dangle as trade bait if they think he's not going to get any better than what he is right now, to try to bring in some other needs and some other things they want to improve. I think they clearly need a big, strong power forward type that's a top 6 forward that can put the puck in the net, a guy that brings size and strength. And they also clearly, I think, need another top pairing defenseman, top 4 defenseman on the left side. Even if Zdeno Chara comes back, I don't think he's going to be that guy anymore.
We saw this in Detroit where, they kind of hung on to their older guys probably a little longer than they should have. And you see the mess they're in now because instead of just, kind of blowing it up and starting over from square one, teams like Pittsburgh and Chicago did very successfully. Where are the Bruins at, do you think, in that process? Are they still – it's got to be tough because they were, right there at the top, and they were considered one of the top contenders for the Cup. It's got to be hard to think about blowing it up. But, you also got, as you say, there's a lot of age on that roster, and they're kind of in almost a no man's land where whatever they do, they can't win in the long run.
Yeah, it's a great question, Bob, and there's no easy answer to it. And I think what it comes down to is it's more of a significant reload than a rebuild. I don't think they're going to blow everything up. They're not going to trade Patrice Bergeron. They're not going to, trade Charlie McAvoy and David Pastrnak and just fill up with prospects and first-round picks and, just rip it down to the studs and bring it back up again. Nor do I think they should. But I think they need to identify 3 or 4 players, say these are the guys that we're going to build around, and everybody else becomes available. And, as I mentioned before, Krejci, I think, because he had a good playoff overall, he's going to have some value out there. The Bruins are probably going to have to swallow some of the money, but there's certainly teams out there that could use a playoff performer like Krejci. He's still a top 6 center. He's a guy that's entering the last year of his deal. I think he's going to be cheaper after that for the next team that signs him. I don't think he would come back with the Bruins after his contract is up. That's the kind of guy I look at as a veteran player that it signifies they're going younger if they trade David Krejci. And it's a not a rebuild, but kind of a massive reload. Maybe they go with a guy like Jack Studnicka as the third line center. They push Charlie Coyle, who I think they envision being the number 2 center once Krejci's gone anyway. And then Patrice Bergeron remains your number 1. But to your point, how much longer can a 35-year-old Patrice Bergeron be the number 1 center that's playing 20-plus minutes a night, that's playing every situation, that has everything on his shoulders? They need younger players like Jack Studnicka, who played a little bit in these playoffs and is their future center, top 6 center that's coming along, the prospect. They need guys like that to take much more of the load on their shoulders, because the aging guys like Brad Marchand, like Patrice Bergeron, the perfection line's been awesome the last few years, but you see them start to slow down in the playoffs because they're on the wrong side of 30 and they have all this weight on their shoulders that they have to carry the team. They're just not able to do it for a 2-month stretch in the playoffs, to get them to the Stanley Cup final. They need younger players too, to be carrying the load along with them. And, some of the younger guys they have right now, like Jake DeBrusk, haven't been doing enough.
Joe, when we enter the free agent signing period, the minute that happens, Torrey Krug will be one of the hotter free agents. Obviously, something gave here with the Bruins over the last year or so. Can you walk us through what happened and why they decided that they weren't going to re-sign, or was it just a matter of money, or was it what they saw his value based on what they were going to have to pay him? Like, where did it break down?
Yeah, I think it's a number of things. I think it's partially his age. He's 29. You're going to be paying – he's going to get a long-term big money deal, right? So you're going to be paying for a guy that's in his 30s at this point. I think it's one of those classic instances of you're going to end up paying for past performance with a player like Torrey Krug at this point at 29 years old. I think there's also some genuine doubt, and people shouldn't doubt him. He's made a living off of proving doubters wrong and having that chip on his shoulder as a 5'8", 190-pound defenseman that was undrafted, that has had a fantastic career and is going to get paid a lot of money because he's an elite offensive defenseman now. But I think the fact that he's a smaller defenseman, that he's entering his 30s in this new contract, and the amount that he's going to get paid, I think all of that stuff made it very difficult for the Bruins to be able to afford him. And I still think there was maybe some hope, or some, if things worked out, maybe they would keep him. But I think once the pandemic hit, once it was going to be a flat salary cap for the next 3 years, that makes it impossible to keep a player like that that's going to command $7 or $8 million a year on a long-term contract, just based on the numbers he has. He's up there with the Erik Karlssons, Brent Burns, Roman Josis of the world when you look at his offensive production over the last 3 or 4 years. So I think they highly value him as a player. I think he's a great leader in that locker room. He's a key part of that leadership group. He was kind of the bridge between the older guys in their 30s and the younger guys in their 20s. He was kind of in the middle there, and he brought everybody together. He was a Bruins-type player. He always played with a little bit of swagger and certainly a chip on his shoulder. And, the power play has been extremely important for the Bruins over the last few years. He quarterbacks that top power play unit. He's a key part of it. So they're going to be missing some things with him gone. There's no question about it. But I think the end determination was they probably need a guy that's bigger and stronger in the defensive zone. They probably need a guy that is good 5-on-5 as well as on the power play, and can play in all situations, and can handle everything at both ends of the ice. It's the classic thing with a smaller defenseman like that, where to his credit, he's played 20-plus minutes a night for the last few years. He's played a top-4 role, and he's done his best as a top-4 guy playing in all situations. But I think they know, they watch a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning that they can't score against in the playoffs because every one of their defensemen is 6'1", 6'2", 210, 220. And I think there's just an admission there. They need to get bigger on the back end and bigger on the front end if they're going to beat a team like that going forward in the playoffs.
Now, obviously, the biggest story with the Bruins in the playoff bubble was when Tuukka Rask opted out and went home to deal with a family matter.
Yep.
There was a lot of consternation, certainly amongst Bruins fans at the time. Do you think there's any issue there going forward, or is he still the goalie in the Bruins' future?
I think he's still the goalie for next year. I certainly think there's probably going to be some conversations that are going to need to be had organizationally and Tuukka with his teammates. Everybody understands if a player has a family issue and needs to go home in this kind of a situation when the players are in isolation, they're away from their families. I think everybody's going to understand that family comes first, and they're going to support Tuukka, and they're not going to question what the decision that he made. But just from a business standpoint with the Boston Bruins, that's the second time in 2 years now that Tuukka Rask has had to take a leave from the team to address issues off the ice with his family. And clearly he's having a little bit of a challenge balancing the private life, the family life, and balancing his professional life as a goaltender for the Boston Bruins as the number one goalie that gets paid $7 million a year. The Bruins are saying the right things. They're supporting him. And I do think he's going to be the number one guy next year. I don't think the Bruins have any other choice because they don't have a guy that can step up. Yaroslav Halak is an extremely good backup, but I don't think at this point in his career, he's the number one for a Bruins team that feels like they've still got, aspirations to win a Stanley Cup. They need Tuukka Rask. Now, beyond next season when his contract is up, your guess is as good as mine. I don't know about the long-term future of Tuukka Rask with the Boston Bruins based on what's happened the last couple of years. And I would also say, just knowing Tuukka Rask and seeing, the issues that he's had there and some of the things that he said over the last couple of years, I don't know how much the fire burns in him to play hockey, deep into his 30s either. I don't know how much he loves the game at this point as opposed to other things in his life that he loves, So we'll see what happens after this following season. I do think he'll be back, but I think it's as much, like I said, about the situation the Bruins have with their goaltending situation right now and not having a replacement for him as much as it's about, just welcoming the open arms open and bringing him in for a big hug once the season's over.
Joe, before we say goodbye to you, what do you think? Will the Bruins look hard at the free agent market or not so hard in the look to fill Krug's position from within? And if you had a guess, what's your best guess on where it'll end up?
My best guess with Torrey Krug, wow. Everybody speculates the Detroit Red Wings because he would be going home. And, on one level, I understand that because I'm sure a kid growing up in Michigan, he's always dreamed of playing for the Red Wings. That's just natural if you grew up there. I've heard whispers about the Montreal Canadiens being interested in him and him potentially reuniting with Claude Julien. I think that would be very interesting, and certainly he would fill a need for them as an offensive defenseman, a guy in the power play and a guy that would really light it up. Habs fans would love to have a guy like that. And, if the Bruins don't end up signing him, and from his words, they didn't really give him too many offers this year, and there wasn't a lot of communication there. He's the kind of guy I could see him going to a rival of the Bruins and trying to stick it to them if he felt like they didn't try hard enough to keep him. I could certainly see Krug doing something like that. So it'll be interesting, but I would guess he might not go far from the Atlantic Division, just all things being equal. One name I would look at with the Boston Bruins, if they are looking, and they're going to have a lot of money this year, salary cap wise, if they don't sign Torrey Krug, they're going to have enough to go out and get an impact player. I wouldn't rule out if he gets to free agency, Alex Pietrangelo with the St. Louis Blues, because I think he checks a lot of the boxes of the kind of player that they want. And if you have a Pietrangelo and you have a Charlie McAvoy potentially as your top pair, and you could bring Zdeno Chara down to a third pairing role, I think that makes a lot of sense for the Boston Bruins from pretty much all angles.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Well, Joel, it's been a pleasure to have you as always. We always appreciate your information, and thanks so much. And I'm sure we'll speak to you again.
Thanks, Kevin and Bob.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
All right. One thing we didn't get to touch on there, and it's kind of intriguing, is the guy that Boston gave up on so early in his career after he won a cup with them, Tyler Seguin. is back with another shot at the cup with the Stars. And
Yeah, he really is. You know what's
I wonder
interesting?
how he would have fit now with Boston. I mean, you can't really, as they say, hindsight is 20/20. I mean, the Tyler Seguin they traded away isn't the same Tyler Seguin that's playing.
No. Yeah, how do you think he's playing in this postseason? Like, his numbers obviously are not up to his standards, to be sure. And there are other guys that I think have really stepped up in this postseason for the Stars. I really like Tyler Seguin. I enjoyed talking to him. I think he's a dedicated hockey player, and I think he really wants to win. And if you remember when they traded him, the thought is that he was partying too much, he enjoyed the nightlife, all that kind of stuff, and it's turned out really not to be true. That hasn't been an issue at all. In fact, he's been a very productive player with Dallas. But in this particular playoff, I think they'd love to see a little more or a few more points out of him to be sure. Yeah,
you just wonder. He missed some games early on in the postseason with an injury, and how they're so secretive about things. You wonder if there isn't something lingering there that's impacting his ability to play at 100%.
Yeah, I think he has to be injured because he just really hasn't been quite the same player. But what's interesting, when's the last time that we really talked about Jamie Benn being a force? Like, it's been a while. Mm-hmm. And if you look at those last 3 games that he had against Vegas, where he scored in every game, he was a major factor in that series against the Golden Knights, and he's been a force for this team. And when you consider that they were the 26th best offensive team, and look at them now in the postseason where they haven't struggled to get goals, it's not like they brought in anybody new. You just have a bunch of guys like Pavelski and Ben, who are just scoring at a higher level. Radulov is scoring at a higher level than he did in the regular season. So, you basically have your star players, performing at their highest level. And isn't that what we always say is the key to winning in the postseason?
Yeah, there really are. I mean, if you were writing a script for a movie, this Stars team, the perfect underdog story. I mean, you got a coach who's been a hockey lifer, who's done just about every job there is in the game, from minor league coach to minor league player, briefly an NHL player. He's been an NHL assistant in just about half the teams in the league, I think. And now here he is, with his chance at the age of 65 to coach a Stanley Cup champion, basically because the guy who was coaching the team had to quit because of an issue off the ice.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is I just wrote a piece of the 8 reasons why I thought Dallas had reached the final. And one of them I mentioned, and I mentioned this on the last podcast, that, Jim Nill and Rick Bowness would be a candidate for the nicest coaching GM tandem in the league. And I actually think that's a factor in the success of this team. And I say that because, part of an issue with some teams around the league is that there's no buy-in. The coach has a plan, and players don't necessarily get into it, and sometimes the coach and GM aren't on the same page and they don't get along. We've seen that as well. But with Dallas, we have a coach and GM that get along famously, and I think the players really appreciate having guys who treat them with respect. I've never heard any story about Rick Bowness or Jim Nill treating players with disrespect. In fact, most of the time, when I've talked to the Stars, they all bring up, what a good guy Jim Nill is to have at the top of the organization in terms of hockey operations. So I think that's been a factor, to be sure. And then you have the improvement of the guys playing at a higher level than they did during the regular season. And the other thing is, they were the number 1 Western Conference defensive team, although they've played a little looser in the postseason than they did during the regular season. But I would say that every time they've needed to tighten it up a little bit, they have. And throughout the playoffs, even when they've given up goals, they've been harder to play with. I think they've sort of used their size and grit effectively. I think they have that in their back pocket when they need to play like that. Although, they haven't always played like that. Maybe that's why they're scoring more. Maybe they need to open it up a little bit in order to do that.
As you say about Rick Bowness, I mean, you see it just from how many people in the hockey world are congratulating him when you look on social media for the filing. So many people. Even I saw Nathan McKinnon quoted saying, if I got to lose in the playoffs, I can't think of a guy that I'd rather lose to than Rick Bowness. And, saying to him in the handshake line, go get it, go get it. Apparently he and McKinnon and Sidney Crosby all have cottages on the same lake and just beyond Halifax there. Another Nova Scotian poised to win the Stanley Cup. And if Tampa Bay gets there, Alex Killorn's from Halifax. Here's a bizarre stat, and I've not researched every Canadian province, but 11 out of the 50 players from Nova Scotia that have played in the NHL have won the Stanley Cup. And that's, you look at that on a percentage basis. I can't imagine there's a state or a province that has that kind of percentage of guys. That's, like basically 22% of guys from one province have won the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, geez, that's amazing. That's pretty amazing. Yeah, when Dallas won, I got a text, and I won't say who it was from, but it was from an NHL general manager who just sent 2 words after Dallas won. He just wrote Jim Nill, and I knew what that meant. He was just happy for Jim Nill, and that he had obviously in Detroit he was always in the shadow of Kenny Holland, who had done a really good job there, and they had Scotty Bowman and Mike Babcock, and I think people within the hockey world knew that Jim Nill played a role in the success of the Red Wings. But it's nice that he has his own team now. To be honest with you, I was concerned about him. I like him a lot as well, and I thought going into the season, I thought his team, he was probably under some pressure for his team to perform well. I think he's pretty safe now that because they were a surprise team. And that's also an NHL tradition that we don't talk about, is the idea. It seems regularly, not every season, but we end up with what I call a momentum team, a team that surprises us. They start out and they play well. Even last year, I would say St. Louis was a momentum team, although their momentum started in the second half of the season. So they started to play better, and it just carried right on. But usually there's a team that in the playoffs early on plays well, they get confidence, the chemistry and the camaraderie seems perfect. They show up at the rink every other day. They just keep winning. They feel good about themselves. I'm thinking about that 2011-12 Devils team that got to the final where you couldn't name one defenseman on the team without thinking about it a little bit. I think about the 2017-18 Predators team who, was 8th or 10th or 11th in the league, somewhere in the middle of the pack, and they end up in the final as well. So there is sort of a history of that, and I looked it up today. Dallas was 10th, among the in the standing in terms of the points they had. They were they didn't have a 20-goal score, 26th as I mentioned in the scoring, and 5-on-5 they were second to last. So they, it was a struggle for them to get some goals, and then here we are in the postseason, and their power play is better than Tampa Bay Lightning's power play. Like, how do you explain that?
Well, I think if there was ever going to be a year where something bizarre could happen, this was probably it. Going all these teams coming in cold. If somebody got, as you say, the momentum, got the hot hand going and kept it rolling, they were going to have a real good shot. You think about the odds. I mean, going into the conference finals, you could still get plus 650 on Dallas winning the Stanley Cup, and that would have been a nice bet to have in your pocket right now with them being 4 wins away from taking the title.
Well, there's somebody out there for sure that have them. I mean, because there always is. Mm-hmm. So somebody felt good. If I had to guess, it's not going to be someone that just had a hunch and looked at this team and saw it. It'll be a guy that just loved the Stars. Yeah. that had $100 and he was in Vegas and said, "I'm going to just go all in and hope my Dallas Stars win." like the guy did in St. Louis last year when they were.
Exactly, yeah. And like the other weird thing, kind of bizarre thing about the Stars is that when Rick Bowness was coaching the Winnipeg Jets, one of his players was Jim Nill. So I don't think there's too many times in the history of the NHL where the GM used to play for the coach.
Well, that's true. That is true. So, and what I think is interesting is because he is 65. I mean, there was a decision that had to be made. Knowing Rick Bowness, that he probably didn't think about it too long, but he was one of the guys that he bears some risk. Being out there, he's at that age where they say, you better be careful. So he had a decision to make, and he chose to come in and I'm not shocked at that. I think most just in the world of sports, like sort of the macho carries over, and you would expect everyone to to participate. So.
Well, I think the setup, the bubble setup, it's been proven by the NHL and the NBA that it works.
Yeah.
Keep them segregated from the population, and you continue to test them and keep things under control and make it work. Now, obviously, you can't do that for an 82-game regular season. They're going to have to figure out a game plan going forward, how they're going to play the next season and when they're going to play the next season. But you can do it for a playoff scenario. It's inconvenient, certainly, for everybody to have to be away from their families that long, but people are willing to put up with it for a couple months to try to win the Stanley Cup. I don't think you could get people to agree to do it for 6 months of a regular season.
Well, the one thing I would point out to people is, Gary Bettman has said that he wants to play 82 games. But Gary Bettman, first and foremost, is a guy that likes things buttoned up, likes a good plan, and likes to keep picking at it until he gets it perfect. And if we all remember, Gary Bettman also wanted to finish the regular season, this one too. But after they, discussed it and kicked it around a little bit, he wasn't married to that plan because, he has flexibility, especially when it comes to improving the plan and making it better and making it airtight. So I would venture that even though Gary Bettman wants to play 82 games, and I think that's his goal, and I think they're still working at trying to do that. If it's got to switch to a 70-game season or a 60, he'll do it if that's what's best for the sport. I think people could have miscast him as being inflexible, but that's not really Gary Bettman. What he is about is doing what he considers the right way. He looks at it, granted, from a business perspective, but that's his job. So, he's certainly not going to do anything that's going to risk the health of players and coaches and general managers. That's for sure. But he's also, going to try to maximize the revenue.
And one of the things I heard Elliot Friedman of Hockey Night in Canada mention was the possibility of kind of setting up regional areas where, say that all the Canadian teams just played against each other, and then teams on the Eastern Seaboard would just play against each other, and teams on the West Coast would just play against each other, and finding a formula where teams didn't have to travel extensively and could kind of stay in the same area and not be doing like baseball is doing, where they're, and the NFL obviously is going to be doing, where they're jetting all over the country to play.
Yeah.
We've also got the border issue, and we don't know when that's going to be resolved. So,
yeah,
what if American teams can't come into Canada in the fall, or even in December if that's where they're going to start? There's no sign of resolution in that issue. So I don't know how the other leagues can get around it, because you're basically just moving. In the case of the Raptors and the Blue Jays, one team moved to the U.S. Well, you can't move either 7 Canadian teams to the U.S. or the other 24 U.S. teams into Canada.
Yeah, no, it's a little more difficult. The one thing I was shocked that the NFL has had no positive COVID tests. I thought they were headed for trouble, but the more I've thought about it, when you're only playing one game a week, that's a little bit different too. I think the amount of time that football players during a season spend at the at the practice facility is significant. So maybe that's the way. That's sort of their version of the mini bubble. We get them to come in, work out every day. Try to get them not to to order food takeout and not to go to restaurants and kind of hope for the best. But eventually someone's going to test positive, and that's going to cause some havoc.
Well, you're going to have the weather changing, and that always seems, well, any virus, that always seems to create more cases. And then you got all the kids in school. They're the first sport that's going to be playing in this pandemic scenario where the kids are going to school, and people are going back and forth to different environments, and that's when the experts tell us that's when it's most easily spread. So I think the NFL is going to be really be the litmus test, I think, for how well you can play sports in this environment and how safely you can do it.
Yeah, and they're going to try to put fans in, so we'll see.
Yep.
Anyway, well, as usual, we've run out of time, but thanks for listening. I'm Kevin Allen. He's Bob Duff. We'll be back. Was it? Yes, Thursday.
Have a great day, everybody.